Hello, everyone. Welcome to our weekly conversation on HCI and the future of work and well-being. If possible, it's great if you can turn on your camera. We'd love to see everyone, but keep your microphone muted unless you have something that you want to ask. So before we begin, I just want to thank the other organizers of the CHIWORK program. So we have other technical program chairs, Max Wilson, Navina Kurasala, Toby Lee, Shadan Sadjian, and then also Andrew Kuhn and Ori Chair, who have also been leading us in this. And then we have our student volunteers who are very helpful behind the scenes doing a lot. So Alberta, who's here, thank you for keeping us organized. She's the assistant to the technical program chairs. We have Isabel Munoz, who is our web chair, and Nabil, who I think I saw was here, is our video chair and accessibility co-chair along with Alberta. We also want to thank the National Science Foundation for partially funding this event. And I will just go over the logistics. As we do each week, the first part of this event will be recorded. It's an informal conversation. And then we are very much looking forward to your questions from the audience. So if you have any questions at any time, you don't have to wait until the end, just throw them into the chat. You can raise your hand. We'll be monitoring the chat for questions. And that will all be recorded, and then we will stop recording, and please stay with us for the second part following the conversation, where we'll continue with an informal social event and continue the conversations. Okay, so with that, I'd like to welcome Yunus Telliel, who is an assistant professor of anthropology and rhetoric, and is also my colleague at Worcester Polytechnic Institute in Massachusetts. Before joining WPI, he was a postdoctoral fellow at the University of California in Berkeley, and he is affiliated with the Interactive Media and Game Development Program and the Professional Writing Program at WPI. He's currently working on 2 book projects. So the first is based on his previous research on science, religion, and secularism. And the second book, which is very relevant to our conversation, draws on his new research on the idea of human technology collaboration in the future of work research. The book is tentatively titled The Future of the Future of Work, and it will explore the future of work as a framework of design and innovation in robotics, platform design, neurotechnology, and computational media. The book asks questions like, what happens when we start to see the future of work as a matter of tech design? What questions aren't we asking? And other questions. So he is a design anthropologist, and he collaborates with engineers and computer scientists on 4 different NSF-funded projects on the future of work, including nursing robots, nonprofit platforms, maintenance work, and each we'll talk about some of these in our conversation. And they help him explore different aspects of workplace technology design. And he also is the social sciences lead on a program that I'm also involved in at WPI, which is a NSF research training program on the future of work, robots in the workplace. And along with this, he organizes a year-long social impact of research workshop for graduate student trainees. He is the co-director of the Applied Robot Ethics Lab and the Just T Collab, which is a collaboration for technology for transformative justice at WPI. And he's the co-chair of the IEEE Brain Neuroethics Subcommittee's Work and Employment Working Group. So with that, we're going to start the conversation, and the topic is the future of work, anthropology, robotics, AI research, and the interdisciplinarity. Okay, so welcome.
Thank you.
Yunus, I know you have a very interesting perspective on the future of work, and I'm excited to hear about your views. As an anthropologist, you're studying people who study the future of work. So that means you're studying how all of us here think. Is that correct?
That is right. Yeah. When I work with my colleagues, in engineering or computer science, that's what I tell them, that, I will help you as you study future of work, but in exchange, I will also study you doing that study. So yeah, that's right. And that's, I guess, like what anthropologists do. We like to think about communities. So I guess what I do is seeing researchers in HCI or human robot collaboration or related fields as a community with its own culture, with its own way of doing things and, way of thinking about things. So, yeah.
Great. Right. So now that everyone has been talking about future of work, and you've started exploring all the people who are talking about it, what have you noticed, and what do people mean when you see that they're saying they're working on the future of work?
Yeah, I think people mean a lot of different things, and that was actually my first fascination with this. That there is this idea or concept or term that could mean a lot of different things to people, different people, yet it is able to kind of like create these platforms like CHIWORK or there are funding programs, a lot of foundations, like Ford Foundation, they have these like committed like programs on future of work, and you see like World Economic Forum or OECD or International Labor Organization, everyone talks about, future of work. And then you see like, Microsoft or Google have, now research and development initiatives just focusing on creating the future of work. And then another, level that is, these consulting agencies like McKinsey, they, create these, constant reports. And if you look at like business magazines, like, like Harvard Business Review, like you see future of work as like a, as a concern, as a theme that's constantly addressed. So to me, that was like fascinating how, like all these people from different disciplines, different concerns, different engagements, different like, commitments and different loyalties, come together and talk about these things in a way that, they think it is intelligible to other people. That is like, I guess, like what is like a kind of an anthropological question. So that was my starting point, like trying to understand actually, how people see, the future of work from their own standpoint. But one of the things I think, of course, like not everyone's perspective on future of work is valued in the same way, of course, like International Labor Organization, has produced a lot of like, future of work reports, but it's not as like, appealing or kind of like attracting media attention as like, as something like World Economic Forum would put out. So I'm also aware of like the asymmetries, there are a lot of like critical voices that, invoke the term future of work and actually like want to do a lot, critical about like the kind of like certain trends that is happening in workplaces. They the folks talking about like social justice, their voices are not heard in the same way. I mean, they're not, they don't actually like, get the same media attention, I think. So I'm aware of the like, asymmetries as well. But what I can say is that if there is like a mainstream, and stream in the sense that actually like a stream that actually like pushing people in certain directions, if there is a mainstream idea or kind of like a conception of future of work, and that is definitely a belief, I think, and in the technologically mediated, nature of this transition to future of work. And as such, again, in the mainstream understanding, there is a lot of attention to like, AIs, AI robots, Internet of Things, neurotechnology, but less so on, politics, ideology, social movements. And that to me is like, again, is like thinking about this, like from the perspective of anthropology and also like thinking about the rhetoric of this very language, like it is really interesting, the kind of like how our imagination is so narrowed down onto a narrow understanding of technology, right? Because when people, again, in mainstream avenues, when they talk about future of work, they, rarely talk about politics, ideology, social movements, law, kind of the things that are related to technology, but might actually like be something beyond it. That's kind of like often like, I think, not registering as a concern, a future of work concern. And that to me is like is an interesting question, like a research question, like how have we come to this point? Like, what happened that we actually like start to like think about future of work in this particular way. And I do, some of my work again, like, Erin, like you described, like it's very contemporary. I work with, engineering colleagues. I kind of like try to understand how they think about workplace technology design. I do user studies. I do, like, try to help them think about the ethics of what these technologies. But I also like to think about the past. I also like to like, think about like, how we were talking about, work and technology before like 2000s. And I feel that like, of course, like during 20th century, there was a lot of attention to technology's role in work. But I think in the last 20 years, there's a significant, I guess, like a trend to narrowly think about like future of work from the, perspective of these emerging technologies. Anyway, I can't say more about this, but yeah.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, so from my perspective, I started hearing the term, from National Science Foundation, had this future of work at the Human Technology Front, or I forget exactly what it's called, but
Yeah.
and that really started bringing the conversation into a lot of, where I am in computer science and in HCI. And actually, while I'm talking about that, I know one of the projects that you've been doing with some of your students is analyzing the NSF abstracts to understand from that perspective from NSF and what are some of those projects that are being funded? Have you started seeing themes of what they are? Of course, that's like a sliver, as you said, it's a sliver because it's coming from National Science Foundation. But within that area, what are you seeing? What kind of projects are people doing across?
Yeah, actually, one of the students, is here, Karen, and she has done a lot, for this component of my research. So we do look at the abstracts, we analyze, we kind of like, do cross comparisons of like themes and the kind of like language, trying to get a sense of like, what actually like, is important, to NSF as they see, as they fund the future of work research. And many people in the US, in tech schools or tech programs, they know the significance of NSF funding. It kind of like actually runs the mill, it is one of the biggest like forces behind actually like advanced graduate education in technical fields. So NSF is a major player in creation of like new scientific ideas or or reshaping of them with respect to like changing questions. As such, I was thinking like this would be a great place to think about like how this is emerging and like changing. And so and in our project we approach NSF's this particular program called Future of Work at the Human Technology Frontier as an actor that actually shapes this field. And what we do is two things. One of them is we look at abstracts to get a sense of the kind of like the meta level understanding of like what are the themes, what are the like funding areas. And when you look at them, you see that robotics, AI, machine learning are the biggest like themes, and that actually tells you something. And the second thing we are doing is to interview people who are funded by this program, and that is the kind of like give a nuance to some of those things, because of course like abstracts is only like a small window into the the all these big ideas these researchers are working with. So our idea is to kind of like with these interviews to kind of like really like get into the details of like how they think about future of work. What is their imagination of the future, right? I mean, that's I think like a big thing. Even if they are technical researchers or they do technical research, they do have an imagination. I mean, they have to do that in order to get these grants. So we are really interested in that. And these are also these PIs, these co-PIs are the people who are educating next generation of, engineers, technologists, computer scientists, HCI, researchers. So they do actually play a big role, the shaping the STEM workforce as well. So that's what we do. And like I said, I think one of the things is interesting things about this program is that it is very much like, focus on human technology collaboration. And then, even the title is like Future of Work at the Human Technology Frontier, which is, I think, like kind of like captures a turn in North American kind of like, science and engineering research. I think very few people now think about there's a duality. And of course, this is not news to, HCI, an HCI community of researchers. But I think people are seeing that this is actually where the future is, like how to think about human in a technological system. And what we try to do, I guess, like that's, my anthropology background kind of like, pushes me towards is so what actually like human technology collaboration about? Like, what does it do? Like, how do people actually define the human? And I think that that's the kind of like the direction we have in this program. And we ask like, just having a collaborative system doesn't necessarily mean that it actually like creates an inclusive system. It doesn't necessarily generate well-being. So our question is not not to think about this duality. I think researchers are already kind of like moved past that. But what is in the human technology collaboration, like which setups would actually generate more the well-being would be like a better served in what kind of like setup. So that is the kind of research we do.
Yeah, interesting. So, and we're coming from the HCI perspective, but I was interested, the NSF does have that human technology frontier. So I was going to ask if you've seen things that are particularly relevant to HCI, which it seems like, a lot of them probably have to have that human component. But then there might be other projects that are more on the tech side. I don't know. Are there, I know you're still in the middle of this, so you don't have the full conclusions yet, but where are you seeing HCI in there?
Yeah, I think that a lot of like, HCI projects funded under the program. And I think the HCI, again, because this particular program has been active for the last like 3-4 years, and they have already like funded almost like 200 projects. It is big, the impact is big. And of course, like HCI, plays a role, like HCI researchers play a role, but their ideas are also shaping it because, HCI, I think like one of the like, I guess like is one of the, I guess like, oldest research traditions, that have been thinking about these things. So they kind of like, even if HCI researchers like actively involved in these funded projects, the kind of like their intellectual baggage is there. I think the HCI is important in these two ways to this particular program. When I think about like, again, this is like really like, a work in progress, and because of COVID, as everyone, experienced this, like, we have had a lot of delays. So I'm reluctant to like, say much about the kind of like, conclusions, but when, one thing I guess like, for all of us to think about is like, certain concepts that, passed on to us like from different disciplines. I think you see that like sometimes HCI researchers use terms like productivity without being very critical of like what it means, how to measure it, and like what are the kind of like baggages attached to it. And that happens a lot, I think, in the future of work research. People do not study management organization, of course, like in the the researchers in these like projects are not necessarily like that's not their field, so they have to borrow things, but they're also asked to justify their intervention with respect to future of work. And that's the point, like they start to borrow certain concepts from economy, the kind of like study of like, economics and management theory, organizational theory, and things like this. And mainstream, I mean, of course, like, there are different traditions. Of course, like in Europe, the study of management is much more radical than US. But what happens is that I think there's a tendency to kind of like, uncritically adopt some of these like concepts. That would be something like I have noticed. And again, I don't want to generalize it because I know that there are a lot of like cool work done in HCI, but that is one, I think, like one thing I noticed, that like this uncritical appropriation. The other thing is, and that's maybe like, again, this is my bias as an anthropologist. Anthropologists love, one of the, I guess, like distinctive things that we do is ethnography. And this is a, it's a form of fieldwork, but it's more than that. It's a kind of like a fieldwork led science of the particular. So anthropologists are, love to think about the particulars, right? The kind of like, there's this close attention to, these particular forms of life, different cultural representations, the forms it takes and things like this. And that allows like, this reflexive, self-reflexivity, how you are situated and, with respect to people you study. One thing about like, this is that it takes time. And I think that like something I noticed, and I've been thinking a lot, again, this is more like a question rather than a conclusion, is that like, I noticed that like HCI, research in this like broad field of future of work, there's a tendency to do short studies. And that's, I guess, like, and again, that's, and I can say that, I guess, like it's mainly influenced by psychology, thinking about like human responses and things like this. And I think that is totally okay. And there is a lot of like interesting things, work done, borrowing like, terms from psychology. But I think that other social sciences, including anthropology, and then maybe that's like self-promotion, that would actually generate like, different insights, especially if you start to think about like the kind of like temporality of like establishing relations, because not all cultural things would be reflected in like, a few sessions you do for a few hours. And that is, I think, one of the, and I'm saying this because I also know that like ethnography is also like now part of HCI education. There are a lot of like, I know that there are many ethnographers in HCI research community right now, and then they do really cool stuff and their work is appreciated. And I think that that is like that is something to think about, I guess, like, how do we think about the temporality of those human connections that allow for like, those critical insights that actually, that, in turn inform HCI theory. I think that is like something I think a lot about. One last thing would be, I think this community, like CHIWORK, I think like is very like critical about like some of these things, but I guess there is like a residue of like technological optimism. And that is like difficult to like get rid of. Of course, like I see this in robotics research too, because this is what HCI or HRI like researchers do, like generate new technologies, generate new understandings of these technologies. So, and that sometimes, I guess, like, can be a challenge, I guess, like, because sometimes what we need is not a new technology, and that is, of course, like a different set, like kind of a question that, I think we need to consider sometimes.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, so with that, I think some of when people are coming from computer science and engineering, that, it's like new algorithms, new robots, new things is what drives. So how do you see some of those more critical perspectives? How could they start getting introduced in, and what would be how would you train the next generation to be thinking about these things along with the engineering computer science education that they're getting?
Yeah. So one thing we do with the program you're also involved in, called NSF Research Traineeship Program on Robots in the Future of Work, One of the things we try to do is to kind of like introduce like classes and workshops that focus on social impact of research. And that is, I mean, I guess one way of thinking about this is kind of an emphasis on applied ethics. But the reason why I wanted to highlight social impact is that it is a language that is already available. Any researcher applying for NSF funding would know what broader impact is. And because, as people who might not be familiar with this, this is one of the criteria of review. If one is the intellectual merit, the kind of like more technical contribution, the other is like to show that like this work has some social broader impact, right? So we use this language, but we kind of show that this is a language that is flexible. So you can still apply for grants. You can still part of research community, part of these like conversations in your research community, while you explore new ways of like thinking about impact, new ways of thinking about ethics. And the reason is that when I started like working with my colleagues in robotics engineering and in computer science, I realized that like they do actually compartmentalize. There's a tendency to compartmentalize ethics as a separate thing. So what happens is that they either invite people to do technical assessment, or they kind of like, nah, that's not what I do. I don't want to think about this because I have a lot of things to cover here in my, introduction to robotics. So then I was like, when I saw that, I was like, oh, okay, we need something else here. We need a different way of thinking about this. And that's why when I started experimenting with this idea of let's focus on something, a language that is already here. And that's what anthropologists do, right? It's kind of like you go to a new fieldwork site and then you learn the language. And that's what I started to do. And I designed a course and a series of workshops. And the goal is to kind of to show that you can still, use this language NSF given you, and you can actually do something else, like push for the social justice angle, push for actually more critical disability, studies angle. So I think that is I guess what I'm suggesting is that we have to move away from compartmentalization. We have to move away from that and try to think about integration. And that integration is costly. It takes a lot of time. So we have to actually find ways that we can actually radicalize within actually the already existing things in the HCI or related fields, I think. So that could be one, I guess, thing I do and I find useful.
Yeah, and how have you, I know some students are here, but so in the workshops that you've done, how have they, what have you seen in the students? And because these are students who are graduate students, right, who are maybe in a STEM field who are doing the workshops. So, what are you seeing in them? How are they thinking about it?
Well, I mean, they are here, so it's kind of talk about them when they're here. They like it.
And this is being recorded too.
Right, yeah. I mean, the response and the reviews, because this is an NSF grant, we have an external review, group. So we are not involved in the collecting this, information or the response from students. So the external reviewers, data collection that happened with students was very positive. They kind of it suggested that this would actually should be considered as the one of the core courses. And at the end, actually, my colleagues agreed and made my own course, even though my course is actually the only non-technical course in the program, as the required course for everyone, every trainee in the program. And I think that says something that that when students are actually when you can reach students, especially given that this generation of students have been thinking about technology with respect to Black Lives Matter movement, with respect to Me Too movement. So they're actually coming through a lot of awareness of what is going on outside of classroom. And if there is a way to kind of engage, students, not again compartmentalizing, but showing that the robots they design, maybe it won't like change the world, or make revolutionize the world, but the people that may affect, like if they can bring those critical sensibilities that are already out there, that they've been exposed to outside of their classroom, if they can bring it into their robot design, into the kind of like when they write algorithms for a human computer interaction project, if they are able to like bring those insights into what they do, I think there is room, and then students are willing to kind of like embrace those ideas or those curricular changes. And I think those curricular changes are not happening at the speed of what we see outside. And, that's of course like a whole different debate, but I think the world is already like, generated a lot of like critical insights for us. And I think like it is researchers' responsibility to kind of like bring that, especially educators who are in the position of training next generation of researchers. It is their responsibility to be able to kind of like, find ways to bring those insights that are outside of classroom into our classrooms.
Yeah, and I'm starting to see questions pop up, and I wanted to bring up, people can, I have a lot more questions, but, and I think this is really interesting, but I want to bring in other people who have questions. I saw Karen post a question. Karen, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, so Yunus, the work that I think we were doing, one of my greatest joys working with you is the way that you approach ethics and encourage viewpoints from outside of a discipline. And I'm wondering how, like, we've talked, but the idea of research identity, is that what you were getting at a little while ago, that we need to be able to identify who we are as researchers in order to be able to take a perspective from somebody else, and then we bring that into our creation, into our designs of robots, etc. Is that what you were talking about?
Yeah, I think that is, that's a, great point. And I think like a better like articulation of what I was trying to say. What I is, again, like as an anthropologist, like one thing I noticed, when I like start like collaborating with folks in different disciplines, is that people, again, this is maybe a matter of compartmentalization, but people do not usually kind of like, shy away from bringing themselves into a conversation. And I think that, again, as an anthropologist, I find this like, I can see why this happens, because of course, like, that there are certain values of objectivity and things like this. And that actually kind of like gives this impression that like, if you, take yourself out of the equation, it would be much more open. But I don't think that is helping a lot. So that is why the work I do when I engage with graduate students, what I suggest is that like, it's totally okay to bring your own experience to the classroom. What I would, or, to our, research group, but what I would want from you is to be open to listen to other perspectives. I think there is like I think it's in modern societies, there is this kind of like separation between like, in order to exist together, we have to like kind of like take ourselves from the equation. And that's how we think about like, that's my previous work, like how we think about secularism. You want to take out the differences, and that's how like we will, but that doesn't work. Like that's impossible to like get rid of differences. So what I'm starting in, when I start engaging with like, people in other fields, let's find a way to kind of like, let's find like a collaboration, like a way of like thinking across like differences, not despite of our differences, but because of our differences. And I think that is a different way of thinking about like difference and identity in tech research. So you don't have to like kind of, and you don't have to put students into this like difficult situation that they have to, not think about their own background. But why not actually accept it And I have like, other ideas about this again, about language sometimes, there are a lot of like international students in tech research in the US, but we don't actually like appreciate the kind of like the language they can bring, like the kind of different ways of thinking about like certain concept. It could be trust, it could be experience, what words they use in China, for these things, and how would you translate it? And not being able to translate could actually generate like more interesting conversations for us. It would take time. And that's actually like, I think how we started this conversation, that like some of these things will take time, but that's the trade-off, right? If we want to actually like engage with diversity, not in a way that like kind of like, make sure that it doesn't create problems, but engage with it in a way that's like, really bringing everyone together with all these differences, it will take time. And I think that is like a kind of like, it's a question for us, I think, like, do we want to commit to that? Or do we want to like follow the short way?
Yeah, very.
Well, if I can interject for a minute, I think it's hopeful. The abstracts that we've been looking at, there are quite a few of them that we've found that are examples of places where people have brought in this reflective attitude. And those I find are really interesting objects or artifacts, I suppose, to continue to research. So I think that's an interesting connection we found at this point.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, great point.
Yes. And I saw, Michael, did you want to add your comments in? Let's see.
Yes, thank you. I think actually the last few minutes make me even more motivated to say this. There are methods in HCI and in participatory design and in computer-supported cooperative work and in studies of work practice. I could go on, but so could everybody else here, in which diversity is part of the virtue of the method. And it's not extra work. It's the way to do the work well. It's the way we can learn by ourselves, and then we'll have answers to the questions we knew how to ask, and we won't be much smarter. Or we can know with other people. And to the extent that we're knowing with people who are different from us, we're going to know a lot more. I think, for example, you were speaking a few minutes ago about vocabulary. So if I think about family, for example, and if I'm talking with people from Northern Europe, well, I'm expecting a pretty narrow definition of family. In the United States, we would probably say nuclear family. If I'm speaking with people from, say, around the Mediterranean, all the coasts of the Mediterranean, family's a lot bigger. It's more intergenerational, it's broader. If I am with Native American friends, they'll spend the first 10, 15 minutes of meeting a new person, finding out who their people are. And in that case, family spans nations. And also for some of those nations, it also includes country. And so the land itself is part of the family. So it's an interesting question. What's family? And if we're studying family relationships, well, then we should know that we have choices, I guess is what I want to say. And to me, that's not extra work. That is the work. And it's I'm sorry, now I'm about to do the sermon part of this. And it's very good work, and it's work that makes us all more human.
Okay. So I want to, we can continue the conversation, but I wanted to say that we'll probably stop the recording in a moment. This is the last talk of 2022, but we will resume back in January. So just look out for our announcements for the next talks. But I think we can stop recording and then
can I say something while we're still recording?
Oh,
which is thank you, everyone, especially Alberta, for this wonderful series of talks this year. These talks are kind of the high point of my week. So I wanted to have on as part of that record of we're done for this year, we're looking forward to next year. This has been really important, at least to me. So thank you.
Thank you, Michael.